Before we begin, the Gamer's Advocate would like to remind you that any episode could contain game spoilers, so watch or listen with discretion. And now your hosts, AMKomnenos, Banana, and Legion. Enjoy the show.
In my attempt to make you understand how angry I am at myself, I may say very mean things to you.
I need you to understand that I don't hate you half as much as I hate myself.
Yeah. Put on the social armor. Put it on. Put it on.
Bury it down. Bury it down.
If you press this button, you get $50,000, but the person you hate most in the world gets $100,000. And there were so many responses of $150,000. Here we go. And I was just like, yep, that's exactly how I would answer that question too.
But I really like right now that in the UK, the Prime Minister's big financial scandal is someone gave him a suit. That's almost cute. You know, that's not even exciting.
Comparatively, that's adorable.
Yeah, that's a very old-fashioned United Kingdom financial scandal. It's quaint.
And it'd be funny if it was like a suit like from, you know, his dad's closet from the 80s or something. Big shoulder pads.
Yeah, it's
that'd be so good.
It's a suit with more sentimental value than actual financial value.
Yeah, but you have to declare that as well.
Yes.
But it's tweed.
Paying taxes on emotion at this point.
This is my favorite new idea. That's my favorite new absurdity, is having to declare the sentimental value.
I just looked at the comments in that thread and they were 8 years old, and I was about to reply to one and I was like, nope.
Oh,
that's too long.
Relevant.
Hey buddy, just wondering if you're still doing okay.
And it was an actually kind of response, so it would have been the absolute worst way to like revive that thread.
Also, check out my podcast.
Yeah. We'll be using your exact comment and not giving you credit for it. Yeah, I was gonna say they did that with the like local theater near me, which I think was like part of a small chain. Now you can go order beer and they will deliver it to your seat in the theater.
Yeah.
If it was the standard rows of seats and everyone's doing the shuffle,
yeah,
and let the waiter pass.
I just need to squeeze past the 13 of you because that guy ordered a beer.
Just be sorry, and then back.
I'm just imagining the like towers that we used to get in college, where it's like 64 ounces of beer that you refill from this tower for a table, and that's now blocking somebody's view of the screen.
Yeah, the onion ring tower.
Yeah.
Awesome blossom.
May we have an awesome blossom, please? Extra awesome. Now it is done.
Well, welcome on in to yet another episode of the Gamer's Advocate. Today we're going to be going over a very, very special topic. I'm excited about it. It's going to be about money.
Show me the money! Jared, you better yell! Show me the money!
I'm excited about it.
Currency in gaming. Oh man, it's like so many little things that each game does to provide an economy. But I really, when I thought of games that have like an economy in it, I wasn't thinking about games in terms of like how do I break this game? How do I break the economy? How do I do this? How do I acquire more money? I was just thinking like, I noticed that there's so many different ways that economy is defined in different games. I was telling Banana before that I have several Tavern games I play, and none of them seem
Several might be an understatement.
Yeah, and the one I really like playing is one called Traveler's Rest. I've brought it up before, but I'm always fighting to catch money in that. Like, you can make a lot of money, but you end up spending it just as much. So it seems the economy is really balanced in that game. But there's other games I've played that are still early access and stuff. But you start off with like 10 gold. Like, okay, is that $10? What are we talking about here? 10 gold. And then you make 100 gold real quick. And what you spend on it is, you don't have to spend on it. It's more like cosmetic stuff and whatnot. So yeah, you can be poor real quick, but it seems real easy to make. So you have to kind of like flesh it out, but just playing the game, you can kind of figure out where they're going with that. And no doubt some of those games, especially the early access ones, will probably have some updates that maybe address that, but it's kind of hard to say. I think a lot of those games really are just trying to put something out there. Finding that little narrow window of what's relevant and how it works. It seems to be kind of tricky in some games, but some games really do it really well.
Yeah, I think you've kind of maybe inadvertently kind of highlighted the games that do it really well. And those are the games where the economy is a core part of the gameplay. So like if you're managing a business, like in Tavern Manager Simulator or something like that, the economy is a huge part of your experience. So they had to put effort and think through how the economy was going to work and how much money you would have on hand at any point, and like kind of balance the revenue that you're bringing in with the next upgrade or the next purchase or supplies or anything like that. So I think when a game kind of focuses on the economy as a core part of gameplay, you'll tend to see developers do it a little better. But like in my experience, games like RPGs where you're on an adventure and you're saving the world, the economy tends to fall away because you'll reach points where you're like, I'm gonna go grind and I'm just gonna kill meaningless enemies for, a few days. And then you're the wealthiest person in existence. And it's like, yeah, it's not really that important anymore. And typically in those games, that money stops meaning anything at a certain point. You're no longer functioning in a part of the game where that economy matters as you progress through those adventure kind of story games, because it's more the stuff you're looking for isn't purchasable. So like you might be looking for like a legendary weapon or something, and that'll be hidden away in some part of the world where nobody's there to sell it to you. So the fact that the economy breaks doesn't really matter. It just means you can go buy more potions or whatever, and like kind of eliminate some of the tedium. And I think it sounds like it doesn't work in the sense that like, yeah, the economy just stops mattering, but like that's kind of the intent. Like that's what makes it work is the economy stops mattering because you're looking for things that aren't part of the economy anymore. Your concern is not the economy, so it doesn't matter if it works.
There's interesting thing with RPGs, JRPGs, any game where you have that choice to go out and grind, you almost exist outside of the world and outside of the world's rules. You are just this one character or this one party that plays by their own set of rules in the rest of the world. The money that you make makes no difference. Let's imagine, for argument's sake, that one potion in a village of 20 people costs 1 million insert game money. So it's 1 million gil. Well, if you go and buy that potion, the 1 million gil doesn't suddenly trickle down into the village there. It doesn't affect prices there. Nothing changes there.
Introduce Ronald Reagan to Final Fantasy.
Too late.
Yeah.
I think I made my thoughts very clear with the sound. It doesn't disappear into the city. No one else gets richer. Prices don't change. This is surprisingly accurate now I think about it. The money just disappears into the ether. If you imagine that shopkeeper has now just hoarded it somewhere. But it doesn't change anything. But then there's games where that very much isn't the case. And the one I was thinking of, because to me it had the most developed economy, was when I used to play Football Manager games. Because all of these clubs and teams, they exist within this one ecosystem. And I remember when I was first starting to play, the world transfer record at that time was, I think, for Zinedine Zidane, who went for 70 million euros, about, what's that, $70 million for argument's sake, to Real Madrid. And it was this really outlandish transfer fee. And years after that, one of the best strikers in the world went to Chelsea for 30 million quid. And you were really stuck in this sort of area where every new player didn't really exceed that. But I remember one time in the game that I bought a player for a lot more. I bought one player for 90 million euros, let's say. But now this club had that money. And all of a sudden they went and paid over the market price for someone else somewhere else. And now those new clubs had that money. And they went and paid over the price. And then all of a sudden the transfer records in my game were well surpassing that 70 million. They were 80, they were 100, they were 150 million. Prices we never thought we'd actually see in real life. Weirdly, that did turn out to be very accurate. I think the transfer record now in football is around 200 million euros. It's an enormous jump from where it used to be. But I think this is where you have to really think about the role that the player can play. Like I say, in those JRPGs, that money disappears. In a simulation game, that money goes into someone else's pockets and they start spending it, which I think would be very similar to an MMORPG, where you could actually break an economy.
Yeah, I think that fact in simulation games, I mean that really goes into how much they want to simulate, but the idea that you pay money into this system and it has an impact on the way that system operates, that is an incredibly interesting feature for a game to have, because it's basically like world building away from the player, to say that, like, yeah, you might have just made a big purchase in this tiny little village or something, in the case of like an RPG, but that village continues to exist when you leave with whatever item you just bought. And the huge influx of money that you've just given them by paying this absurd price should have an impact on them in a very well thought out game where, you know, they had the time to develop that. But I think we see it from, like, you know, in the case of Final Fantasy, like, I go to Gagaga and I'll buy everything they have, and then I'll come back 3 months later and it's still a shithole. Like, it doesn't actually have an impact as much as you would hope it would.
I'd love to see a game where they did do that. It'd be fun if they did it maybe in a way that you didn't necessarily expect. So, for example, you go and pay this merchant 1 million gil for your potion. Maybe the merchant just leaves. There's nothing left to gain. The merchant's already done everything they could possibly hope to do.
I sold my entire inventory. Time to move on.
Yeah, maybe they build some grand manse somewhere with this new area. Maybe they turn out to be pretty charitable and they make their village better. I'd love to see that. I'd imagine it would be immensely complicated.
Yeah,
but I would love.
Yeah,
to see
I think that's it. Like, I would love to see that in Final Fantasy VII, but there's no way they had the time to be like, all right, let's develop micro economies scattered across the world and tie them together through this main character's team. Like, no, that's you are focusing on so much that is not part of the game.
You say that, but in Rebirth, no, I'm messing with you. There's nothing. Sorry.
Games that are like, you mentioned simulators, but like a lot of the, you know, I'm thinking like Manor Lords that just came out for early access. That's a harsh economy to master, because a lot of things in that game are just hard to master. And there's not a single thing that's easy in that game, but it's fun to play. So if you have your farming down and you can say, okay, I want to build this, suddenly you're being raided. Now those mercenaries that you needed to pay for, you don't have the money for. It's kind of like that. But a lot of those simulator games that have to do with colony sims seem to really focus on the economy as a real basic part of the gameplay that blends itself into the background. But I think they do it with a much tighter focus, and it translates a lot of times. You can often tell a bad game that's a colony sim because you're like, well, this just doesn't make sense. I'm not making it work. Usually it's probably like an economy thing. Like, I had a problem with City Skylines. That's my main issue. It's like, I can build in that game. I've been doing, you know, the, SimCity, you know, since the first SimCity. Had no problems with that. I do a lot of Planet Coaster. I've done, the one that came before.
Roller Coaster Tycoon?
Roller Coaster Tycoon. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, it's all about the economy, and it's all about just doing enough so that you can just...
I was going to say that one that Com brought up with the, what was it, on floppy disk?
The 9 floppy disks. Theme park.
Theme park. Yeah, I did not do that one. But my point here is that, you know, you can actually create the economy, and you have to focus on that if you want just your park to not just grow, but just survive. But there are some titles, to me, like City Skylines was one of those. It's like, yeah, you can make money after a while, but it's not the easiest. And it's one of those features in that particular game that I just didn't like.
Well, I think colony sims in particular, they're a really good illustration because they exist on a pretty small scale. If we think of games like RimWorld, it's a very small scale. You only have 10 people, 20 people, whatever it might be. And you've got this finite amount of resources, and you can imagine what the resources are because they're going to be multifaceted. It's people, for one. There's materials, there's labor, there's money, or whatever currency you're actually using at the time. And let's say that you've got 100 weapons, which is going to be a good currency in that area. Let's say you got 100 weapons, raiders come, and now you kill the 10 raiders. Now you've got 110 weapons. You've just actually massively altered your economy instantly with a 10% influx in this. On the other hand, what if the raiders break in, raid your storerooms, take away 50? Well, now they've buggered off with it all, and your economy's been cut in half by this one simple raiding activity. I think it's a very good way for colony games to feel dynamic, is that just their economies are so massively affected by what feel like relatively small events, but actually they play a huge role in the amount of resources that you have. And in a game like that, you probably can't get more. You probably have a finite amount that's then altered by these roaming bandits, by these roaming aliens, whatever it might be.
I think that's kind of a big part of it for me with like games where the economy is well done. Everywhere in those games, the economy feels more or less like a closed system, and any departure from that is very controlled. So like in the case of your economy with raiders coming in, they're going to take away some small portion of whatever you've accumulated, but it's not going to be like this is an everyday occurrence. It's a controlled small fluctuation in the way your economy works. Whereas in games like Skyrim or Final Fantasy, like that is not a closed system because you can just go randomly kill enemies and find money on them to the point where like you have an infinite supply if you're just going to put in the effort to grind it out. And I think you're not going to see that in a colony sim. There's not going to be an infinite supply unless it's an infinite supply that you have access to at a defined rate. So like I can mine from this resource at completely infinite and just go on forever, but the rate at which I acquire that resource is limited, and I have to balance that with the other resources to say like how many workers am I devoting to this, how many purchases can I make in that same time frame with this new resource. And that's kind of the only way I see economies in games working in a way that's logical. Like you can't have an infinite resource and an economy that makes sense.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's the concept of the infinite, which really will ultimately mess up any in-game economy. And it could be anything. It could be infinite labor. It could be an infinite resource. It could be an infinite amount of money that you could farm as soon as you introduce that infinite concept. As long as we've got long enough to sit there and play, or as I'm thinking of, and it's an odd choice, Final Fantasy VII Crisis Core. So you've got the slot machine, that's how the leveling up works. When your character hits 777, they level up. If you just leave the computer on, put your character on guard mode, and stand there for hours, eventually they will just level up. They will just level up. They will just level up. You've got to do nothing for it. And if you can just put the time in, you can essentially break the game. You can end up on a ludicrously high level very, very early. There are some caveats, but in principle, you can do that. If you do the same with auto mining in a game, building, and you can just go away and leave your controller for a while, you can absolutely destroy the in-game economy just because we introduced that concept of the infinity. As soon as you do that, you lose, ultimately, the ability to control whether or not your economy stays viable, stays believable. And it's now up to the player.
I think you've also kind of highlighted something that I missed in my initial explanation, and that's the way that you accumulate this resource kind of has to be separate from the rest of the game, in the sense that like, yes, I can go into Final Fantasy VII and I can just put in hundreds of hours grinding against enemies and level up and get a ton of money. But that's because there's nothing going on while I'm out grinding. There's no negative progression happening. I'm thinking of games like Frostpunk, where your economy is hugely important, to say that like there's no way to separate that decay of your resources from the accumulation of more resources. So like you have to balance your your income with your outgoing costs. And that's what makes the economy work. Whereas in Final Fantasy VII, you're not balancing anything. You're just increasing. There's no negative cost there. So that's how you get to broken economies. It's the idea that one thing can just continuously grow while the rest of everything else just kind of stagnates. And then you come back with that massive resource boon that you've generated by ignoring the game for hours. And now nothing makes sense.
Oddly enough, I had that in a game that was often, it was praised for its reality, which was Kingdom Come Deliverance. I remember when that first came out, I ignored quests as soon as I had nothing that was time locked. That wasn't, you have to be here in 3 days, you have to be here in 1 day. I just walked off into the woods, shot rabbits for a while until I could actually shoot reasonably well. Eventually then just walked along the main road until I saw someone in nice armor, shot them, took their armor, and now for doing nothing, the game hasn't changed. The game hasn't moved on, the world hasn't changed, the enemies didn't get stronger around me, time didn't go by to the point that my character's now missing out on some important quest. Essentially, I left home on day 1, entered into a time warp, messed around for 1,000 years, emerged as this immensely strong knight, and then emerged on day 2 of the story, as everyone still speaks at me as though I'm covered in dirt and grime, as though I've never picked up a sword before, but my character's actually the best archer in the realm, and he's got this full plate armor with the massive helm on. And it was just, the game offered me the possibility to invest infinite time.
Yeah.
And therefore break their in-game system.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that the infinite resource in that sense is time. You can step out of the regular time of the game and just improve your character in a way that the game is just not intended for. And I think one of the games that actually does that really well in terms of like kind of time gating you so that you can't just boost your character to overpowered levels is Mass Effect 2. Because if you think in Mass Effect 1, as soon as you get the ship, you can go off and do your own thing. And like there's limited resources in terms of what you can do for experience, but like we can go fight everyone and get their gear and sell it. And then you have like this pretty great starting point if you ignore the main story and just build up Shepard very early on. But Mass Effect 2 tells you there will be consequences if you ignore the main story for too long. And I think those are not consistent throughout the entirety of Mass Effect 2's campaign. I can't remember the exact mechanics, but I think there's like 2 big points where that time gating system works. And you can't go level up your character. You can't go grind and make them overpowered. And you can't go gather the resources for your upgrades just infinitely in that game, because you have to balance fuel consumption, you have to balance probes, you have to balance your progression in that system and deal with the fact that just looking for that stuff triggers the Reapers. So like Mass Effect did in a strange way have a very effective economy in Mass Effect 2, but I think the reason that the economy works is because they never let you separate from what's really going on. There's never this sense of like,
Right.
There's some infinite resource out there. We just need to get it.
Yeah. So I need raiders in my City Skylines game is what I need.
Yeah.
A way to reset things.
Reapers in City Skylines. That's what we need.
That would be great. I play it a lot more, that's for sure. Because man, I do play a lot of colony sims too. I do a lot of tavern things. I do a lot of colony. I'm embarrassed to tell y'all how many hours I have in Planet Coaster. Planet Coaster 2 is on its way, so I'm hoping I have time for everybody.
Yeah, I'm with Cobb on this one. I don't think you are embarrassed because you've streamed it.
Yeah, I stream it.
You're like, watch me waste more time in Planet Coaster.
Yeah, I think I'm almost at 2,000 for Planet Coaster alone. I think I'm 1.2 for Planet Zoo, something like that. Anyway, I love those games.
I was thinking of another topic on the same lines. And it's not so much the individual in-game economy as a grand scale. It's more the economy on a very local scale, essentially you, and how a game can influence your behavior, and how your behavior can influence what's available in a game. So think of a game that's on rails. So this could be an old-fashioned sort of JRPG without the open world. This could be a shooter. Resident Evil would have a lot of this. But I'm thinking of a game more on the lines of Baldur's Gate 1. So when I first played this, I tended to start in Candlekeep, go over to whatever building there was, open that person's chests, take their stuff, go to the next building, open that person's chest, take their stuff, next building, yada, yada, yada. I go on. I get to the next town, I sell as much of this stuff as I possibly can. Now imagine a game that's linear, where you have, let's say, 1,000 gold available in the whole game, and you can get this by killing enemies, by completing quests. The best sword in the game costs 1,500 gold. But there's another 1,000 gold available if you're willing to steal. If you're willing to go into every single drawer and take that person's objects and sell them. I'm curious as to what point we can actually dictate a player's behavior by putting things out of reach of them if they choose not to engage in theft, if they choose not to engage in stealing. And at what point gamers actually would sort of stand up for their morals and not do that. And they say, no, I don't want the best sword. I think the answer is we would all steal so we can get the best sword. But I'm curious, how you can control a player's behavior with your in-game economy.
I feel like starting that with the conversation about Baldur's Gate is where you get into players who won't steal. They'll lean into the role playing as much as possible, and they'll say, no, there's either another way I can do this, or I just won't.
Yeah, the mechanics of the Baldur's Gate series, I mean, especially like if you're playing Paladin, if you get caught, you're no longer Paladin.
Oh, but then we're talking about the idea of morality versus just being punished for something. I don't want a player doing that because they're getting caught. I want them saying, no, I'm a Paladin, I wouldn't do this anyway. But oddly enough, that's the reason it came to mind, was my playthrough of Baldur's Gate 1, which I did on stream. I didn't steal at all. And I had a few people in the chat, sort of friends, who were just saying, just steal. Just take everything you can. I did. But it never felt right for me with the character to do so. And there were points in the game where I thought, I could really do with a bit more money. I feel like I don't have enough. And I wonder at what point I was hamstringing myself by not stealing.
Well, you kind of mentioned like with Kingdom Come and even really with Baldur's Gate. I mean, that's called the grind. We call it the grind in a lot of RPGs because what you're doing is that you're either leveling your XP, you're leveling your resources, you're leveling your money, or maybe all three at the same time. But that's the grind. And when you apply a certain grind to a game, that can be a negative term too. It's like, I really don't want to do the grind. But it is a part of the game that is a necessity because obviously you're not going to end up with a lot of wealth. And Baldur's Gate is an amazing example. I mean, me and Banana have talked about this before, how well done a lot of the little things that you would think are just nothing, but they're done so well that you just don't recognize them. So in Baldur's Gate, you have nothing. You are nothing. You're nobody in this world. So even though you go to like the mines in Nashville in Baldur's Gate 1 and you may handle that, you're not going to come out of that very profitable. It's not like you found anything in the mines that are of that much value to begin with. So, you find like these swords that are bad. Maybe you might find a cache, but all the iron is bad in that area. So you found.
Yeah, it wouldn't make sense for you to properly be rewarded from, for example, from a mine owner who's now on the verge of going bankrupt.
Right, but even the guards that are there don't have the best. They're just there to guard people who are unarmed and unfed and malnourished. They're just they don't need to be. They don't need the finest of weapons. So the group that's controlling that is not giving it to them. So it makes sense. There's so much little things in that game that makes sense that you just don't see it everywhere. A lot of times it's like, okay, this is your world and just accept it. With Baldur's Gate, they did something pretty special with that game. But I mean, with the grind, obviously MMOs refer to it a lot, but they have a different way of referring to it because a lot of times you're trying to level, and that comes with a certain restriction of things you can do in the game with others. So there's that stressing point versus just you wanting to see the next area or something. Well, you can't really do that, in a traditional RPG, a solo RPG, just because of the limiting factors of your level and things like that. But in an MMO, you kind of have the stress like, look, we need you as a healer. We can't go into this particular dungeon without you. So you kind of have that stress of having to like grind. And so there's a reason to do that grind. But otherwise, in an RPG, if you apply that same grind from an MMO to a normal one, is not great. But the economy has a certain limiting factor of like saying, look, you get 100 gold for bringing in whatever quest that you have. But in order to upgrade your materials that you need to get X weapon, it's going to take you 500 gold. So you got to do this 5 times. And that's where the grind becomes kind of almost ridiculous. It kind of sets your economy in your head, even though the economy in the world is a separate issue.
I think it's interesting that you brought up Baldur's Gate and like all the things that they do very well, because I'm thinking of like kind of going down the road that the Com was talking about, and just abandoning your morals and getting access to like everything you possibly can. But I feel like the developers for Baldur's Gate kind of recognized that was an option immediately, and they had to put a stop to that. So like, if your reputation gets too low, like if you get caught too many times just breaking the law, they'll start introducing guards that attack you on sight. And then at a certain point, you will be attacked by enemies that can't take damage anymore. So your ability to break the economy has been completely dismantled by the fact that there is now an infinite resource, and it's that character's health pool. And he is going to chase you relentlessly. So like there are, it's funny that like we're talking about the things that Baldur's Gate did right, and how there's this little thing that like you can, if you're paying attention, you'll catch. Whereas like they recognized the potential for somebody to break the game, and they were like, all right, we're not gonna be subtle about this. Yeah. We're just gonna introduce like the you shouldn't have done that enemy. And I just like that idea that like there are those subtle ways to handle it, to say like, oh no, there's just not enough resources in the world for that to happen. So like that's one way to handle it, is to make everything feel realistic. And then the other way to just be like, no, we see what you're trying to do here, and no, we're very clearly not going to allow that. And I think they're both they can be very well done. One of them is inherently just more fun than the others when it happens.
You must gather your morality before venturing forth.
I think it's a fun idea in Baldur's Gate, though, especially Baldur's Gate, because it gives you the idea of a dungeon master who is just absolutely sick of you.
Yeah.
To the point, you're not following my campaign. I've built this world. This is going to be a nice weekend, and look what you're doing. And then they bring in the army. So you can see almost there's personality in that choice that they took that specifically fits a game based in a D&D or AD&D rule set.
Yeah, it definitely it harkens back to that dungeon master who built this huge campaign, and you fixate on something they like mentioned in passing, and now the the trajectory that the quest is taking is not what they intended at all, and they have to like improvise all of the stuff that you're doing. And then he's like, you know what, no, there's a Tarask there, so you're going the other way. Like, I'm going to railroad you back into the campaign I wanted you to play.
I was getting confused in my head because I had already thought of a counter example as I was saying that last diatribe about RPGs and stuff, but that's
appropriately labeled.
Arguing with yourself.
Yeah, I was arguing with myself in my head. Yeah, it happens a lot actually. But the Elder Scrolls did none of that. It said loot all you want. It's an open world. You can take all the saucers, and that confused me when I first played Morrowind. I was in the when you get off the boat and you're in the officer's thing, you see this platter full of this table, you see silver, you see everything. You're like, this has value attached to it. Why is this not guarded? But there's a limiting factor there, because at the end of the day, the game makes it to where the money is just not important. And the quest items that you find, yes, I mean, not the quest items, but magical items that you find, yes, have value to them, but they're very easy to obtain. But the game is basically trying to say, look, the things that you find and stuff, that's really part of the questing part of it. That's what you want to find. So yes, you could sell this or that for 10 gold or whatever, this magic sword or whatever. But I mean, it's of limited value at the end of the day. There's nothing that's so overpowered. And the things that you find, yes, I mean, things that are overpowered are things that you find. But they're not just so much so that they break the game. So I think Elder Scrolls is the one unique example where they didn't do any of that. They just said, here's the world. You can steal all you want. And it, little point of reference here. I don't know if Skyrim does that, but Oblivion and Morrowind
definitely does.
You could actually, when you steal something, you could put it right on the ground. So even if they see you, you don't have it. So they absolve you of all your criminal activity, and then you can pick it up. Like, it's not, because it's no longer a possessed item anymore.
And that's what you do with the plate in the very, very first room.
Yep.
I think that, though, is where you see that it's not really unique. It's doing the same thing all those JRPGs do, where it's saying that you exist within the wider rule set of the world, but ultimately you are this one person who has this extra agency to completely break all of the rules and operate entirely in the way that you want. So really what they've done there is they've pulled away from that more D&D-like tradition, and they've essentially lent into the silliness, and they've lent into that RPG, you are the hero, operating outside of this world. And honestly, I think it fits wonderfully with Elder Scrolls as an idea, though, because when you play a Morrowind, for example, I think it's the easiest one because it's that Morrowind, I feel, exists as a transition just before they hit their modern gaming with Oblivion. It still has the awkwardness and the rule breaking that a game like Daggerfall had. If you think when you leave Sedanin, that first town, and you walk left out and you walk 100 feet, there's going to be a wizard who falls out of the sky. And he's going to drop at your feet, I think, 1 or 3 scrolls that allow you to literally jump across the map. And they're telling you immediately in that first few minutes that if you want to, go and break the game. Go and have fun. Why not make a potion that damages you for 1 million damage every second, but also heals you for 1 million damage every second? Why not go and do that? Why not make it so you can fly? Why not make it so you can do X, Y, and Z? So in a way, Morrowind is built upon a system of allowing you to destroy every system that you come across.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I mean, obviously, we don't ever take like a super aggressive stance, but like you can definitely make a game where the economy doesn't make any sense and it's still awesome. And you can make a game where your attention to detailing in the economy is a huge part of the game and is really appreciated. But Skyrim is not that game for me where the economy ever matters. And I think, well, my experience with Elder Scrolls is mostly Skyrim. And Skyrim is probably one of the first games I realized that, like, if you just want to, you can break everything. It's not just the amount of money that's in the world, but like if you accumulate some money and then you go around buying up soul crystals, and then you gather a few alchemy ingredients and you learn a potion that boosts enchanting, and then you enhance your alchemy, and then you enhance your enchanting, and then you enhance your alchemy until they have just grown exponentially so that finally you have like plus 1 billion% to sneak and you can hide while touching somebody. The game is just completely and utterly broken at that point, but it's still so much fun. And like, even the little process of going back and forth doing that game breaking alternate kind of sequence that you're doing, it's still kind of exciting. It's still kind of like there's no way this is going to work. And then it works. And you're like, this is amazing. So I think ultimately the point I'm trying to make is the economy doesn't matter in video games unless you want it to. And like in Frostpunk, if the economy didn't matter, the game would be terrible. but
think
it
it's-
does matter, and they did a really good job with it, and that makes the game work. In Skyrim, it doesn't matter, and it wasn't supposed to, and that's what makes it work.
The way that you can really think about it is along those same lines, is the economy doesn't matter unless it does.
Yeah.
If you're playing a JRPG, if you're playing Elder Scrolls, it really doesn't. We don't care because we're there to break the rules. But if you want to have a game where it matters, and this is an incredibly tautological argument, if you want to have a game where it matters, it has to matter. And that's a very different kind of game. And normally is the wrong word, but I'm going to go with it for now. Normally, we don't want that. Normally, we want to exist outside the rules. We want you to establish a framework within which the world operates so that things make sense, so that we can get in, so that we can understand. But then we want you to let us specifically, not everyone else, us specifically, mess with it. In the same way that you want us specifically to be able to drink health potions, but I don't want my boss drinking health potions.
Right. And I think that's kind of the big distinction for me is if you're in a game and the economy in the game doesn't make sense, then you have to be the only person with access to the elements that don't make sense. Because if you're playing Skyrim and you recognize this process of I can go get a little bit of money and then I can just focus on alchemy and enchanting and until it just explodes and then I break everything. Why isn't everyone just doing that? Because you can just learn these things. It's not challenging at all. And then you're talking to beggars in Whiterun, and it's just like, dude, I broke the world. You just go do what I did. You can't take it seriously at that point if you're just saying like, yeah, no, I fought like a bear, and now I'm the most powerful being in existence.
Dova bear. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't get to maintain that sense of like, oh yeah, this is a very dark, disappointing kind of world where poverty still exists when this process also exists in that world. It has to be separate. It has to be exclusive to you in order for the world to still exist.
You said that the mage that falls out of the sky in Morrowind. I can't tell you how many times I've seen like, oh, I saw somebody beat Morrowind in the first 5 minutes because they just went to the wizard and did that thing. I'm like, that if you want to, that'll take you to Vivek City next to Vivek, but that's not winning the game. I mean, I don't know, how many of you played more you never played more without never playing Morrowind, without telling me play Morrowind.
Yeah, that's something that I think we as gamers kind of get into with these like speed runs where it's like, yeah, but did you?
Yeah, I don't
Did you
think
win?
you understand. No.
Like, yeah, you got to the end credits. That's not why I
you can't even get that's what I'm saying. But Morrowind, as far as an economy goes, it's a little bit more compressed as far as what you can do in that game because in Skyrim, you may have several vendors that have 2,000 gold, 3,000 gold. There's a limit, because I can't tell you how many times you go try to turn in your dragon bones and not everybody buys them and not everybody has enough money to give you for them. So you either have to take them at a loss or whatever. But in Morrowind, there's only 1 or 2 vendors that have even more than 500 gold at any one time. And one of them's a mud crab. So like, it doesn't break the immersion because it's like, that's not what this game is about. It's not about the economy. Yes, you may have 8,000 items and yes, you could end up with 80,000 gold, but at the end of the day, it's not really what you need in this game to, advance forward.
Yeah, I think that's one of the qualities of the Elder Scrolls games that, again, most of my experience is through Skyrim, but like my understanding is that there's a story that exists in the world and you play a role in that story, but the role your character plays and your character don't have to match at all. So I'm thinking like in Skyrim, when I joined the Thieves Guild, I'm supposed to be like this just getting started, desperately in need of money kind of like street urchin kind of character. but I can start that quest whenever I want. So I could be the richest person in Skyrim, and I can't remember his name, but the interim leader of this the Thieves Guild at the time could still walk up to me and be like, "You're poor, huh?" Like, no, very much not poor at all. But okay, I see that you want me to pretend to be a poor person right now, so I'm gonna do that. And it's just the way that the Elder Scrolls games tell the story, and it's just like, we're gonna pretend that you're not, you know, overpowered to absurd extents here. You're just another person for the sake of this story. And then you play through the story and you get to experience it in that way. But you could also just break it so that like there's no challenge in that quest line for you, because you've already gone out of your way to focus on growing your character. It
I feel
really
that's
opens it to like how you want to experience it.
that's how a lot of games work. Especially when I'm playing a story-based game that does allow you freedom. So Red Dead Redemption would be this. Morrowind would definitely be this. Final Fantasy would be this. For me, there's almost two characters that exist when I'm playing the game. There's the character that exists within the cutscenes, which is actually the lore, which is actually the canon. And that's when my character is poor. That's when my character is struggling. That's when my character is really worried about the boss fight coming up. And then there's the character I'm actually playing as, who is absurdly overleveled, who is having equipment that they probably shouldn't have, but we knew how to game the game a little bit, who has 99 Phoenix Downs in their pocket, 99 high potions, 99 elixirs, wherever it might be. And they exist in this almost fever dream within the game world. And the character during the cutscenes is the real canon character. And my character is just this absurd entity who exists in between just to let me play the game.
CD Projekt, of course, did something very different with The Witcher, like you mentioned, like Red Dead and stuff like that. The Witcher versus Cyberpunk, because I think before all the patches and when Cyberpunk first came out, it was more like The Witcher when it comes to the economy. You couldn't just things that you needed, like a lot of your goofy armor, which was like the hot pants and the street jacket that didn't match. All that had armor stats on it. And then they removed that, and now it's just purely cosmetic. And so they completely flip-flopped their idea of an economy with that idea. Because now it doesn't matter how much money you have. It's really more of a cosmetic thing. It's not a stat thing. What you're trying to progress in Cyberpunk is your abilities and your skills. So I think I talked to Banana before about his Graveyard Keeper. You can have all the money in the world. You're limited by your experience things, the little red, green, and blue. So if you have all the money in the world, it doesn't mean you can do everything. So I think that's a really interesting way of doing it, saying, yes, the economy is there, and yes, you can have fun with that, but that's the fun part of the game. The hard part of the game, the grind part of the game, is the experience stuff, doing things. That's neat.
And I think that's one of the ways that makes it very easy for developers to kind of control the economies of their games. Is we think of the economy and it's usually about how much money is in circulation. If you introduce a different currency in your game, you can assert control over a character's progression in a way that doesn't really disrupt the idea of an economy. So the monetary economy in Graveyard Keeper is broken, but I still can't get an overpowered character in the sense of there are other limiting factors. And I mean, we've talked about that in the sense of like RPGs where the economy can break, but the economy of weaponry, of armor, of gear isn't directly tied to that. So you've created a new economy and it's very limited in the sense that there might only be one of these weapons, or you might have to go through a quest line to get a weapon that you really want. It's not tied to the financial implications of the world. So and that's where you get into that situation of the money doesn't matter anymore. It's a different economy that's controlled by different forces that you're really focused on. So we say the economy is broken, but it's just because that's the economy no one cares about anymore.
I have another example of a similar idea, which is Elden Ring. So in Elden Ring, you do your leveling up from roughly level 0 till roughly level 160, wherever it might be. You level up all your skills. And if you're playing on the basic game, not New Game Plus, you're playing the basic game, no DLCs, when you're at that level, you're about as strong as you're ever going to be. You're going to walk through a lot of early bosses. Some of the later ones, they might be a bit tough, but you're certainly ready for them. And then when you get to the DLC, they decided to change the way that the game was played. So there are going to be people who have finished the base game and then they beat the main bosses and they're at level 105. Then there are going to be people who beat all 16 remembrance bosses, the main ones, and they're going to be level 140. Then you're going to have people who beat all the bosses and all the mini bosses, and they're going to be at their max level they could possibly be. Well, we want all of those people to play the DLC, ideally. Now, if those people want to play the DLC, they're going to be dropping in at these really different levels. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be different. But we don't want to reset their progression entirely, because how bad does that feel when you've leveled up this character and all of a sudden the game says, great job, also back to level 1. So they allow you to keep the stats that you have, but then within the DLC, they have this new currency of experience called the Shadow Tree Blessings. And you just go and you pick these up, and every time you take one, all your stats get boosted, just a little bit. Only within the DLC. And the way that you get these is by going and fighting bosses. The way you get these is by going and finding new hidden areas. And it was just a way that they had to adapt that game to people who are going to be in very different situations, who might be over-leveled, who might be under-leveled, and give them all a chance to go and play that DLC at the same time by inserting that currency only within the DLC. And if you level up in the DLC with these blessings and you go back to the main game, it does not carry over. It only exists in that world.
Yeah, this goes into kind of gameplay, but that's why I've also never cared for the Dark Souls method of doing that, where you lose your souls and things like that. Well, I'm being punished because there's not a vendor nearby. Great. So I always felt like you lose a little bit of agency with that, because it's like, I could use this to have, I didn't know what I was going to face at that point, but now I do. But now I don't have a vendor and I have to go face that guy anyway to get my souls back. I don't need that. But
there are ways around it, but I take your meaning.
But on a surface level, that's kind of how that works. But it's like, okay, I did my part. I did the grind to get here. Why am I being punished for facing an enemy that had nothing to do with that grind? But I get what you're saying. But the example that you gave, or that of like where that doesn't work, I was like, to me, that's Dark Souls. But yet I'm not critical of it, because I get it. I totally get it, because the kind of player that likes that challenge will embrace that issue.
I think your discussion with the Elden Ring DLC also pointed out something to me that I would not have immediately associated with an economy, and that is the idea of DLC. So for RPGs, you'll see that a lot when they introduce new DLC. You almost need a new currency. You need a new economy, or it's incredibly frustrating. And the one game I can think of that never introduced a new currency or a new economy is Destiny 2. And I hate it. Fucking hate that game so much. And one of the reasons, I mean, I probably wouldn't have framed it this way, but one of the reasons is that every new DLC didn't really introduce like a new economy. It just reset you to 0 in the existing one. And I hated that, because I would put in all this work to get everything, and then a new DLC would come out and it would be like, no, all that stuff you worked to get, you did all that grinding for, it sucks now. You have to start over. And I mean, like, that's ultimately the entire point of that game, is just grinding. Yeah. But it was so irritating to me that like there was no way to leverage previous success when new content came out. It was just, you're starting at the same point everyone else is, and the only real advantage you have is you might have weapons that have valuable kind of perks to them, but they're still worthless in terms of like the amount of damage they do, and you have to put in that grind to like bring those weapons back up to the new level cap. And it's just like, no, I did the grind for those weapons already. I don't want a new grind to make the weapon that was awesome and now sucks. I want a new grind to make that worthwhile again. Just let me keep the weapon. And yeah, that's getting a little off topic, but I hate Destiny 2.
No, I don't think that was off topic.
We need to do a beginning game with like, say something nice about Destiny 2.
No. I just refuse to participate.
Something nice about Destiny 2 would be the guns feel good. That's it.
There you go. The guns feel good.
I mean, the core gameplay of Destiny 2 is a lot of fun. Yeah. It's everything else, which is 80% of the game that I fucking hate.
It's like telling someone you really like their nose but hate them as a person.
But yeah.
We're going to get into the comments of like, how come Banana likes Destiny 2? I don't understand.
Yeah. Can't wait for somebody to completely misinterpret what I'm saying. Tell me I'm defending the exact opposite.
Defending the indefensible.
Yeah.
I wanted to pull us into another subject on the economies of video games, but this would be more to do with currency itself. And it was the idea of what role currency can play in storytelling in the game. And what I was really thinking of here was two examples that come to mind. One would be Fallout, and the other would be the Metro games. So in Fallout, you have the currency. It's no longer we're exchanging money. Ultimately, we can't agree anymore across society, generally, about our old paper money, about our old coins, about them being held up, who's going to guarantee them when things turn bad, etc., etc. So we've relied on this new resource that we found, this finite resource of bottle caps. And then you have in Metro that the currency is no longer recognized generally, and we now deal in pre-war ammunition, I think it's called. So in this world of real scarcity, in this world where everything is bad, the one thing that we can rely on is bullets. And the one thing that we can really rely on is high quality bullets that were made in these factories by actual arms manufacturers before the world all went to crap. Now we can make bullets, but they're not that good. They might jam. They might be not be a full clip. There might be issues with them. But when you have the original packaged pre-war ammunition, you can use that as a foundational currency between societies. And then what role that can play within the game. Because in Metro, for example, those bullets that are so good that you can use to trade, the problem is they're so good. You want to keep them. You want to use them. You want to shoot enemies with them. But if you do, all of a sudden now, you don't have the money to go and buy the items that you want. So really what I was trying to look for is games with interesting currencies. In this case, for me, it was, like I say, Fallout with the bottle caps and Metro with the pre-war bullets.
I think games where the money system is tied to a story element provide a little more interest for me. So in, most of like the JRPGs that I've played, that money is just a placeholder. It's just, it doesn't mean anything. It's, what's the difference between gil and dollars? No one cares. Like the whole point is that it's just a placeholder. It's just, this is an arbitrary unit of value that you are then exchanging for other things that you find valuable. Whereas in Fallout and Metro, there is a very real world explanation for why these things have value and why we're using them as a currency. And I think, just because my favorite games are always very story focused, having an explanation like that in world that both establishes a reason for you to care about this currency and a reason for this currency to exist in the real world just enhances a game so much more than just saying, yeah, it's money, it's whatever. Like, yeah, it's a thing that matters in the world for reasons, not because we've just assigned a value to it. Yeah. That's, I think, really cool.
I think when you say that, I was like, oh, what game that uses alternate? It's some of the more things you wouldn't think of, like Age of Empires. Like, it has to do with food. Collecting food is your currency at the beginning. Now, you do get gold And the gold translates into things you can upgrade or things you can get only through that method, but it's usually a later upgraded item. But it kind of makes sense. Your economy is based on your food at a Stone Age level. I mean, how obvious is that, right? But yeah, there's certain games like the only thing I could think of, like, well, there's like top of my head I was thinking of, because I've seen it played a little bit more recently, is like Alien Isolation. There's no economy in that game. It's an economy of what you kind of keep for yourself. It'll if you were a loot goblin before, you might find yourself no longer being a loot goblin so much. You'll still look for things, but it's not the pressing issue. But yeah, I don't know. And I've been playing this game called, well, Banana knows about it, The Worshippers of Cthulhu. There's no gold in that game at all. It's all based on faith, blood, a bunch of other things that are just within its own little tiny economy. Yeah.
I think that those RTS games, or like those strategy games where you're introduced to different economies, so like wood and food in Age of Empires, or in Civilization where faith becomes a resource that you can then spend. Those are games that have kind of an interesting take on them. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's still just a thing that has an assigned value. So I don't know that I really find it as imaginative to say faith is a currency, when it's just like faith is just another name for a different color gold. Like it's not really that different. I'm trying to think of ones where like the actual currency is interesting, and none of them are really coming to mind.
The only one I realized in the minute or two after asking the question that I might have taken sort of the only two. But when you were just saying about the currency just being interesting, it did draw me back to the Metro one for a few moments. And it's the idea that it's quite literal, it's quite heavy-handed, but it's dark. Is if you say an item is worth 5 bullets, for example, or 5 bits of ammunition, you're essentially in that world saying it's worth 5 lives, which is incredibly grim, but a beautiful form of storytelling.
I'm just trying to think of other games that had kind of like an interesting take on it. So like if you can think of in Mass Effect the idea that, you know, you have credits and those are kind of an established currency. I'd kind of like to see an idea where, say you go talk to Arya and she's in this kind of lawless world of Omega. They don't use credits because credits are a very kind of ordered, controlled substance in the world that Arya refuses to be a part of. I would kind of like to see a game like that where they're like, oh shit, we have to go to Omega, so none of my money makes any difference there. I have to accumulate a different resource there. I think those kind of mechanics are really interesting. The idea of like an alternate currency where people are rejecting this kind of established, we assign value to this thing, and they're just like, yeah, but I don't trust it. I feel like that makes for a more interesting environment.
I love the idea of you just being at the airport in that world, desperately trying to convert your Republic credits into handshakes or whatever they want.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mass Effect 2 has all those resources that you use to unlock items, and that's my least favorite part of the game, is not that, but getting the resources. I'm like, why am I farming so many planets for no reason?
I used to love that. Put on the radio, listen to an episode of In Our Time with Melvin Bragg, and probe some planets. Beautiful.
There's a lot of people that love that.
If you enjoy the grind, yeah, there are definitely games for that. I'm thinking of like the Warriors Orochi games that I used to just spend hundreds of hours just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And there were items that only dropped if you fought a specific enemy, like a named enemy in these battlefields. And if the battlefield had basically progressed to the point where they were very challenging. So you basically let this kind of like this counter kind of tick up to say that like, all right, now the enemies have reached their like max potential for being a problem. Now you have to go find these officers and take them out, and there's a chance they'll drop this resource that lets you craft their legendary weapon. Like, that's a unique kind of idea of an economy, to say, like, I really like this character. I need to go grind to basically fight against that character in these kind of randomly generated battlefields, but I need to wait until it becomes a challenge to actually fight them, and then they can drop something that makes my version of that character more powerful. That's a really cool idea, I think. But the idea that it's tied to a random number generator, not so cool.
Yeah.
Random number generators destroy an economy for me.
Yeah. In Mass Effect 2, I always kind of thought, well, instead of unlocking the shotgun, I can still buy the shotgun, but I can use those resources I found to give me a better version of that shotgun. I would grind for that. But I'm very critical of Mass Effect, but Mass Effect 3, of course, you linger too long and diddly around too much on those planets, you're going to get a surprise by the Reapers. And if they had kind of integrated that, kind of like Zelda 2 meets Mass Effect 2, where you're on a planet, we have Batarian pirates out there, and you're in the Attican Traverse. What if you're like doing those resources and just one of them, boom, you got to go into combat now because you accidentally triggered the wrong group of people while you were at that planet. And that would have been it adds a little bit of danger with what you're doing to try to upgrade your stuff. So
I think
I would have hated
liked
that so much. Banana, I would have liked it.
Yeah. I would have liked that more than the insta kill aspect of the Reapers detecting you. So like, if you were scanning for resources and this notoriety just kept increasing, so people were more and more aware of your presence, and then the result wasn't necessarily Reaper show up, but like somebody shows up to try and take away your resources, and there was a gameplay element that determined how much you actually lost or potentially gained, in the sense that like maybe they try to raid you and you actually win that fight and you get the resources they brought with them. That would have been way more interesting to me than just, don't get touched by the Reaper. Game over.
Yeah.
Load your most recent save. Like, that's not interesting to me.
I've just remembered something that's not really related to this at all, or certainly not directly. But
that's what we're all about.
It's just to do with the sneaking in thievery, and it reminded me of something that a friend of mine did. And I'm pretty sure a few weeks later he was raging because it didn't work and he lost his stuff. But in Skyrim or Oblivion, he had leveled up his sneak and he was getting very, very rich, and he didn't have like enough room to put items that he'd found. He didn't want to sell his dragon bones, didn't want to sell his ore. So he used to sneak up on NPCs and put them all in their inventory and use them as walking chests. And that is my favorite thing in the world, is the idea of that reverse theft of, no, you carry this for me. You carry this. And I think a few weeks later, like in game, the NPC's inventories reset. So I'm 99% sure he went back one time to go and find something and just had that moment of, oh.
I still remember reading an article of one of the people who were working on Skyrim. And I think it was like, it wasn't a developer. I think it was kind of like a project lead, somebody who was not directly involved in the kind of like technical aspect, being very proud of the fact that he made the decision that dragon bones were exceptionally heavy. And I just remember reading that article and I'd be like, oh, fuck that guy.
Yeah, it's your fault.
He was basically saying like there needs to be a catch to these extremely valuable resources. And I just remember thinking, the economy in your game doesn't matter. You've just put an obstacle in a broken game. Like you've created an obstacle where there should be none because you've eliminated everything else. And he was proud of himself.
Yeah.
Like, and no, you're a jackass.
It's such an arbitrary place to say, like, no, this one is too far.
Yeah.
This is where we have to draw the line. Like you say, every other obstacle was removed, brushed aside a long, long time ago. But this is too much.
Yeah. Like, sure, you're going around slaughtering dragons at ease. It's just casual for you, but you can't carry their corpses. So
I can remember a few times playing it where I just couldn't be bothered fighting the dragon because I was thinking, well, my inventory is quite full anyway. Yeah. Like, forget this. And now you've discouraged me from doing one of the things that your game did really well. I mean, do you remember the first time that you saw a trailer for Skyrim and saw just the dragons flying around? And then they could land and you could fight them? How amazing that was, how cool that was. And now you're giving me a reason not to fight them. You should be giving me every reason to fight them.
Yeah, and your example that you gave, Com, about the reverse theft. That's why I didn't ever use companions, because companions do stupid things and they get themselves killed, and now they're carrying all my extra loot. No, I have to do something about it.
Only bring the vampire companion with you.
I was about to say, I did that until Serana. And then once I got to Serana, I didn't care. I'm like, no, she's staying alive no matter what. I will reload this entire thing if I forgot to save. But yeah.
I'm still Team Lydia. Ride or die.
Lydia, no!
See, it's funny because you say ride or die, and one of the options is die. That option doesn't exist for Serana. She is exclusively ride. She wins.
She's the Baconia of my Elder Scrolls.
We just inspired a whole new genre of fan fiction.
I don't know if that...
No, it's not new, is it?
Yeah, that's not new.
Might have breathed some new life into it.
We started off talking about gold. We ended up with Serana, and Lydia. So,
just imagining the thumbnail just being like vampire riding. You're like, what is this episode about? And then we just talk about money the entire time.
Ride or die commerce. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, of course, if the video is something that you like, give it a like. Yeah, we do have a Discord. Join us there. Comments are greatly appreciated. And we are at the moment posting every Friday. We may go back to a more schedule where it's like Monday and Friday, but I don't know just yet. Just depends on timing and stuff. But for now, give us a like. And we're going to be doing some streaming. Com has done some very successful XCOM. And I think you're going to be doing Final Fantasy next, maybe?
Final Fantasy 6 should be the next.
Okay. Yeah. So at this point, by the time this video comes out,
if you don't suplex the ghost train, I will stop watching.
Noted. Don't suplex the ghost train.
Can't be bothered. Yeah.
Preemptively backseating at this point.
Well, we will check you guys later. Y'all take care. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.